Hello, everyone. Welcome back from the tea break. Uh, the next session of this afternoon is from Milind Borate, Chief Technology Officer, Druva. He will speak on the top 5 considerations when selecting your cloud service provider. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Milind Borate.
Good afternoon, folks. Is on? I'm Milind Borate. I co-founded Druva in 2008, and today Druva is one of the leading laptop backup providers. I continue to serve as Chief Technology Officer of Druva. As some of you may know, we essentially provide a laptop backup as a cloud service also. But more importantly, at least for the purposes of this talk, we are a very interesting cloud service consumer also. So we use, say, Google Apps for email. Our sales team uses Salesforce. Our support team also uses Salesforce. Our marketing team uses Marketo. We use Amazon Web Services to host our own cloud service. We use Google Maps, we use Skyhook's location service in our product. It's kind of a big list, as you can see. And as we were kind of evaluating these cloud service vendors, what we found was there's a common checklist that you can use to essentially evaluate your cloud service vendor. And it's this particular checklist that I'm going to share with you today. It's not really sorted in any particular order. The first thing that comes to mind when you think about cloud is service level agreements or SLAs. I mean, it's a very commonly used term, SLA. There are different facets of SLA. So I'm going to cover 3 facets of SLA. The first one is performance. Right, and the performance again could be used or it could be measured using different metric for depending on the type of the service or the cloud service that you're using. Right, so if you just take a very small example, say if you're using a cloud service for hosting your website, then in that case you would measure the performance of that cloud service by measuring the page load time, say. If you're using backup as a service, you would probably use the speed at which the server or laptop is getting backed up. That would be your performance metric. So that becomes an important service level agreement. As essentially between the cloud service vendor and you, there is this agreement that gets signed saying that you will give me this much performance for this particular service. But whatever could be the type of service, what's a common factor there is the network performance. So network latency, the speed that you get from the network. I mean, simply because you're using the service over a network, you're using the server over a WAN, this becomes a major factor. And because of that, the location of the data center could be a factor when you kind of purchase a cloud service. So just want to share an interesting tidbit with you. As I told you, we use Amazon's web services for hosting our backup service, right? And Amazon has these data centers like all across the world. And we also offer our customers the same facility, telling them that, okay, whichever region you want to back up to, you can just have a data center. I mean, we can just host your backup in that data center, right? And our Indian customers, they kind of tend to choose Singapore or Tokyo as the data center, thinking that they will get a better latency to Singapore. And as it happens, some of the ISPs, some of the big ISPs in India, they route the traffic to Singapore through USA. It's kind of weird to see that you can get much better latency, much better network speed to USA as compared to Singapore. So yeah, coming back, the other important aspect of performance is scalability. So that's one factor that would apply to any kind of service. Again, say example, your website is getting say 100 hits per day today, and your service, your cloud service can actually handle that kind of a load on the website. But if you are expecting the website to move to something like 100,000 hits, right, in next 6 months, say, you need to make sure that your cloud service will scale to that level. And how do you kind of figure that out? How do you figure out whether your cloud service could scale to that level? One thing is you could look at the architecture of the service, right? And anything that's built around a centralized architecture is very unlikely to scale, whereas something that is built around a distributed architecture, a very great chance of scaling. So you can essentially see that shift happening now. So what is being called as big data or distributed databases, people are kind of moving from centralized databases to distributed databases now. Moving over, the next facet of SLA is availability. Essentially, in today's world, if a service is down for some time, that translates directly to money lost. Again, for example, if a email service is down for 1 hour, right, there's a lost cost due to lost productivity. I mean, people cannot work in that time, and there's productivity lost. And there's a direct cost of lost opportunity that's associated with that. If a website is down for some time, I mean, especially if it's an e-commerce website, there's a direct loss of revenue that's associated with that. So availability is a very major factor, and availability is usually measured in terms of how long the service is kind of up over a given period of time. So typically over a period of say 1 year, and you will hear terms like 3 nines of availability or 4 nines of availability. So 4 nines of availability, it means 99.99% availability, and it kind of translates to less than 1 hour of downtime over a period of 1 year. And that kind of availability is sufficient in most of the cases. And most of the cloud vendors, right, when they kind of claim certain availability, they essentially also say that if we cannot really cater, or we cannot really essentially give you that kind of availability over a period of time, then we'll give you credit for that. And you can use that credit to essentially use that service beyond your regular expiry date. Next facet of SLA, durability. So I don't know anyone here if they kind of know what this picture that's I have projected out here. There is a iron pillar in New Delhi, and there is an inscription that you can see on that iron pillar. This inscription doesn't really interest me so much. What interests me is this pillar was built or manufactured 1600 years back, more than 1600 years back. And as you can see, the inscription is as fresh, as readable as it was written yesterday. We all want our data to be durable like this, right? Because it's okay if the data is not available for some time. I mean, if the service is down, you cannot access the data. But that data should be there, and when the service comes back up, you want to access that data. You are not fine with losing that data, right? And again, durability is essentially measured as a percentage of objects that are guaranteed to be durable over a given period of time, again typically 1 year, right? So if we look at say 4 nines of durability, what it means is over a period of 1 year, there's a possibility that you could lose 1 object out of 10,000 objects. That's kind of scary because 10,000 is not such an uncommon number, right? You'll have 10,000 emails sitting in your email, so there would be 10,000 say customer records that you have in a relational database. So you expect a lot stringent kind of a durability, and typically the durability numbers are much higher compared to the availability numbers. Say for example, again In case of Amazon's S3 service, the durability is actually 11 nines, right? Whereas Amazon's or any typical web service, when they claim availability, they claim 3 or 4 nines of availability at the max. Moving over to the next aspect of next point in the checklist, how do you essentially grade your cloud service vendor? Security. And security, I'm considering two facets of security. First is data security. And what does data security mean? Data security means whatever data you are storing on the cloud, that data should be accessible to you and only to you. No one else should be able to access that data, right? And where all can someone actually hack into your data, or kind of there could be unauthorized access to your data? There are two places. One is the network. As the data moves from your machine over to the cloud server, someone could actually snoop that data, right? And it's very essential that encrypted network channels should be used for transferring the data from your machine to the cloud server, right? And the other places, essentially when the data gets stored on the server, at that place also it should be encrypted. And the key factor is that the encryption key that is used should be available only to you, because that data belongs to you. That key should not be available to the cloud vendor or the cloud vendor's employees. So very important factor to keep in mind. The other facet of security is essentially the processes. The processes need to be secure, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, the infrastructure or the servers on which your data is stored, only authorized personnel should be able to access that infrastructure, right? And only for authorized purposes. How do you ensure that this kind of a thing is happening, right? So again, typically cloud service vendors, they come up with audit reports. So they audit the processes using third-party impartial auditors, and then these reports are kind of made available to you. You can go through these reports and make sure that the processes that are followed by the cloud service vendor, the kind of controls the cloud service vendor has over that infrastructure, that's sufficient for ensuring that there's no unauthorized data, unauthorized access to the data. Right? And typically you will see something like a SAS 70 or ISA 3000 kind of reports that a cloud vendor could provide you. Moving over, legal and compliance, and this is one area where I'm not so comfortable with, right? Not my area, but at a very high level, there are like country-specific laws and regulations which talk about what kind of data could be stored outside the country. So some countries don't even allow the data, corporate data, to go outside the country. And even if they allow, there are like regulations around where you can actually store that data. Some countries have regulations around for how long you need to keep those company records, for how many years you need to keep those company records. As far as I know, there are no such regulations so far in India, apart from the IP protection laws and the copyright laws that we have. There are no regulations around cloud computing. But I'm sure essentially in near future, we would kind of start getting these kind of legislations. I'm just kind of keeping my fingers crossed that our government kind of comes up with a sane policies or sane regulations around cloud computing. Very important factor, cost. One thing that usually happens, not really related to the topic of this presentation, but what happens is there's a big debate whether the service or the software should be installed in-house or it should be used as a cloud service, right? And cost becomes an important factor. So we kind of look at the cost of hosting it in-house and the cost of using a cloud service, and this is not typically apples to apples comparison as it happens. Say again, for example, you are hosting or you're looking at a relational database as a service, and that relational database service is giving you a backup guarantee along with that. So the cloud service provider guarantees that the relational database would be backed up, say, every week or every day, and plus the provider is guaranteeing that they have a disaster recovery plan, and in case one data center goes down, they will make sure that a disaster recovery data center would bring up the service for you, right? Now, when we compare this cloud service with the in-house solution, we should compare the cost of running a relational database service with backup and with disaster recovery, right? Otherwise, it doesn't become a apples to apple comparison, and quite a few times we tend to think that the cost of running the service inside our own data center is much less compared to running it on the cloud. Anyways, as I said, I will not related to the topic of this discussion. Coming to the costs as they are kind of portrayed by the cloud service vendors, there are two ways the cloud services are, two models the cloud services are priced. One model is per user kind of model. So if you have 100 users who need access to a particular service, then the vendor will kind of charge you like say $10 per user or $100 per user, that kind of a model. The Salesforce has this kind of a model. They kind of charge you per salesperson, that is who's supposed to like log in and access the system. This model is really good in terms of the predictability of the cost. You can always predict, I mean, depending on how many users are likely to use that service, you can always predict how much cost you are going to incur over say next quarter or next year. But if out of those 100, only 10 are like power users, they're using the service a lot, and rest 90 they like use it only occasionally, then it's not a very cost efficient model per se. So in that case, the second model might be better for you, which is like per use kind of a cost. So sometimes what the cloud service provider says is if you log in these many times, or if there are like these many page views, right, or if you store this much amount of data in the cloud, then we'll charge you some amount depending on how much usage you had for the service. So this model is very good in terms of the cost efficiency. You can, I mean, you are sure that you are just paying for whatever you used, but quite a few times this model breaks in terms of the predictability. So unless you know exactly how much you are going to use, your predictions for say next quarter or next year, they could kind of go haywire. So I'll just give one example what happened in our case. So we use Google Maps as a service in our product. Essentially we do geo tracking of devices, right, and for tracking a device we use Skyhook, and for showing the device in a map we use Google Maps service, right. And Skyhook, we bought that as a pay per user kind of a service. So if Skyhook is installed on 100,000 laptops, we pay some amount to Skyhook, right. But for Google Maps we didn't get that kind of option, and for Google Maps we ended up paying per view kind of a price, right. So if the map is viewed 10,000 times or 100,000 times, Google will charge us depending on how many times the map was viewed. And exactly the same thing happened for Skyhook. The payments that we are making to Skyhook, they are like well within our predictions, well within our estimates, because we know what kind of licenses will sell and how many devices will have Skyhook installed on them. But in case of Google Maps, what's happening is whatever we kind of estimated for 1 year, right, that kind of got exhausted in 6 months itself, right, and now we are kind of paying more to the Google. It becomes very difficult to estimate those kind of charges. And the final point in that checklist, but most important point in the checklist, the service itself, right? And one big point I want to make here is, with cloud service, there's absolutely no excuse for you as enterprises who are like buying cloud service not to try this service, right? Because the server is already installed, it's set up there in the cloud, and the cost that you incur towards doing that trial are very, very minimal costs that you are incurring, right? So you should try this service, and all these points that I mentioned earlier, right? So if the vendor is claiming certain performance, make sure that in the trial period you get that performance. If the vendor is saying that, okay, they will give you 1 Mbps of backup speed, just make sure that you are getting that kind of speed in the trial period. If the vendor is saying that it's like 4 nines of availability, make sure that the service stays up in that trial period. Ensure that the service essentially fits into your workflow. Check whether service is customizable. Check whether you need customizations. Those kind of customizations are available in the service. One more thing you could do is, again, look at your access pattern. Get a feel for how much you're going to use that service, what kind of costs you will incur with that service, right? So bottom line, just take a very close look at the service, take a very close look at the features, make sure that everything is working for you before you actually take a purchase decision. So just to conclude or summarize, there are 5 points in the checklist when you're looking at a cloud service vendor. You should look at the SLA, the service level agreements. You should look at the security part of the service. You should look at the legal aspects, compliance aspects, price, and most of all, just make sure that the service actually works for you end to end. So with that, I'll just open up for questions. Anybody has questions, can take that up. Any question in the back? Thank you so much for attending the talk, and
thank you so much. Just from UBM, we'd like to offer you a small token of our appreciation.